National Geographic presents a Java tutorial. This week, the nested for loop. I'm Grill Baz, and today we venture deep into the Java libraries to stalk the elusive nested for loop. This is a for loop, but you most likely knew that already. What we're observing today, though, is a specific type of loop called the nested for loop. Ah, I can see one now. Look how it doubles in size. It consumes the other weaker loops to gain strength. This is a nested for loop.
What this loop is doing is running another for loop for every incrementation of itself. What this means is that every time the for loop runs, it runs through the entirety of the inner for loop. Here's a visual representation of what this looks like. As you can see, it creates a sort of two-dimensional traversal. Every line of stars you see is the inner for loop running all the way through once. Every column of stars you see is the outer for loop running all the way through once. So in this example, the outer for loop controls the number of rows, while the inner for loop controls the number of stars in each row.
So, what makes nested for loops so deadly in the Great Plateau of Java? Nested for loops save you from copy and pasting loops over and over again, which in the great wilderness of the Java Plateau can be a deadly waste of energy. Now let's talk about what makes nested for loops tick.
You probably already know how to declare a for loop, but just in case, we will quickly go back over it. Now here, we're declaring a variable. In this case, we named it I. Next, we make a conditional so the for loop knows when to stop. We then tell our variable I that we either want to increment, go up, or decrement, go down. Finally, we create the body of the loop by placing an open bracket and a close bracket. Now, the nested for loop needs two for loops, so we have to do this twice. Make sure the inner for loop is inside the outer for loop's body.
While the nested for loop is generally docile towards users, it can still be dangerous if not handled correctly. Before we demonstrate how to handle one, we have to catch the beast first.
In order to catch the beast, you have to learn what not to do when attempting to use a nested for loop. Nested for loops cannot have the same variable name. If you name the variable that both for loops use I, your code won't compile. Try using a different name, like J. Another common pitfall is when creating nested for loops, you might use the wrong variable name when coding the body of your inner for loop. If you're used to naming the variables in your for loop something, let's just say I, you might type the variable for the wrong loop. The final common mistake we're going to talk about is putting the inner for loop in the wrong spot. The inner for loop should go inside the body of the outer for loop. If you find your for loop not running anywhere near the expected amount of times, it might be a good idea to make sure your inner for loop is in the right place.
While hunting in the wild Java libraries, luxuries such as making your nested for loop effective and appealing may not come often. But if they do, our resident smart guy has some tips to help you out.
Not many beginners know that you can actually name your for loops, but in order to do this, there are some guidelines you have to follow. Naming a for loop is similar to naming a variable. This means that you can't use any Java protected keywords, have spaces in your name, or do anything else that would not work with declaring a variable name. This makes it so the for loop can be referenced by other methods, two in particular. Mulvaney probably hasn't taught you how break and continue work. The break statement immediately stops any conditional a for loop needs to meet in order to stop. The second your code calls the break method, it will break out of the most inner for loop. But Java programmers realized you might not want to just break the most inner for loop. That's why they allowed break to accept the name of a for loop so it can choose the loop to break out of. Now that you know how break works, let's talk about its opposite, continue. Continue does the exact opposite of break. Continue will tell a loop to run one more time even if the condition for it to stop is met. Like break, continue can be given the name of a for loop to continue. To specify what loop to continue, you use the same syntax as break. You type the keyword continue, add a space, and then type the name of the loop you want to continue. But be careful. Using continue or break in the wrong way can result in a never-ending for loop, or a loop that only ever runs once.
So now that you know how a nested for loop works, the next time you go venturing into the great Java libraries, don't forget about the great power and energy the nested for loop provides. Grill Bears out!